What if I told you that you've spent your entire life looking at vampires without realizing it? That the most famous paintings in history hide bloodthirsty creatures disguised as saints and angels? Forget everything Hollywood taught you about vampires. The sharp fangs, the red velvet capes, the gothic castles lit by lightning. All of that is modern fiction, invented only 200 years ago, before Dracula terrified Victorian readers, before Nosferatu haunted silent cinema. There was another kind of vampire, a vampire that was more dangerous precisely because it was invisible, a vampire that inhabited the halls of popes and the chapels of princes. The artists of the Renaissance knew this vampire. They painted it thousands of times, but they used a secret language, a visual code that only the initiated could decipher. Until now. Here is the paradox that will guide our journey. If you search in museums for Renaissance paintings with the word vampire in the title, you won't find a single one. Zero. Absolutely nothing. This happens because the term vampire, as we know it, was only popularized in the 18th century. But the creature, the cultural anxiety it represents, the fear of the undead that drains your vital essence, that has always existed. The real question is not, where are the vampires in Renaissance art? The question is, do you know how to recognize them when they stare straight at you from the eyes of a painting? Because they are there, in every church fresco, in every portrait of a pale noble, in every allegory of death that you were taught to admire as a masterpiece of humanity. Our journey will not be to look for obvious vampires. We will not look for fangs or drops of dripping blood. We will search for something much more disturbing. The cultural whispers of the undead, the allegories that represented the draining of life, the symbols that encoded nocturnal terror, the figures that inhabited the impossible space between death and life. Renaissance Europe didn't need to name its vampires. It lived with them daily. It saw them in the plague victims who walked like corpses before they died, in the children who died, sucked dry by mysterious illnesses during the night. The artists weren't painting vampires. They were painting reality. And reality, at that time, was indistinguishable from the vampiric nightmare we know today. Get ready for a visual archaeology. We're going to unearth the hidden meanings layer by layer. We're going to read between the lines of every brushstroke. We're going to do what no museum curator dares to do publicly. We are going to reveal the vampires of the Renaissance. And when we're done, you will never walk into an art gallery with the same eyes again. Every pale Madonna will seem suspicious. Every emaciated saint will reveal its true nature. The question is not whether they are there. The question is, are you ready to see them? Imagine waking up on a morning in 1348 and finding a third of your city dead. Not metaphorically, literally dead. Bodies piled up in the streets because there aren't enough arms to bury them. This is the context you need to understand before looking at any Renaissance painting. The Black Death killed between 75 and 200 million people. Half of Europe disappeared in 5 years. But here is the terrifying detail that history books don't emphasize. People didn't die instantly. They wasted away. Day after day, they became paler, weaker, more cadaverous. Entire families watched their loved ones transform into something that was no longer alive, but not yet fully dead. Gray skin stretched over bones, sunken, lifeless eyes, slow movements, almost spectral. Renaissance medicine had no explanation. Doctors spoke of miasmas, poisonous vapors that drained the vital force, of imbalanced bodily humors that sucked the essence of life from the inside out. Without meaning to, they were describing exactly what, centuries later, we would call vampirism. The gradual and invisible draining of human vitality. The artists witnessed this daily transformation of the living into the living dead. And they began to paint it, not as fantasy, but as documentation. Thus arises one of the most disturbing artistic genres in history, the dance of death. Paintings and frescoes showing skeletons dancing with the living. But look closely. These skeletons have a peculiar characteristic. They are not merely white bones. Many still have scraps of rotting flesh stuck to them, decomposing skin hanging in strips, partially dissolved muscles revealing ribs. These figures exist in the intermediate state. They are not fresh corpses, nor completely clean skeletons. They are bodies in the process of decomposition. They are, technically, the living dead. And what do they do in these paintings? They grab the living. They touch their hands. They pull them into the dance. There is a transfer happening, a passing of something from the dead to the living. Scholars call this memento mori, a reminder of death. But observe the body language. The living do not simply observe death. They are dragged into it, sucked into it. Examine Peter Bruegel's The Triumph of Death, an apocalyptic landscape where armies of skeletons massacre the living. But look more closely at the victims. Many do not show visible wounds. They simply waste away, collapse, as if something invisible were draining their strength. The skeletons don't always touch them directly. Their mere proximity seems to be enough. Now consider another artistic genre, the transy tombs. Funerary monuments sculpted to show the noble not as he was in life, but as he would be after months of decomposition in the coffin. Imagine commissioning your own funerary statue and asking the sculptor to represent you with rotting skin, worms coming out of your eyes, mouth open in a silent scream. Why would anyone do that? Because the boundary between death and life had disappeared. The corpse was no longer the opposite of the living. It was an imminent possibility. You were not alive or dead. You were somewhere on the spectrum. And here is the vampiric connection no one makes. The vampire is precisely this, a being on the spectrum between life and death, not fully alive, not completely dead. Renaissance people didn't need to invent vampires. They saw them every day. In the advanced stage plague victims, in the dying who took weeks to finally pass. There were even documented cases of people buried alive who scratched at their coffins trying to get out. When those coffins were opened, they found bodies in contorted positions, fingers bleeding. Imagine being the gravedigger who opens that coffin. You don't see a peaceful corpse. You see something that struggled, that moved, that tried to return. How would you not call that a living dead? The fresco paintings in cemeteries show exactly these scenes. Bodies coming out of graves, not as glorious resurrection, but as terrible emergence. Cadaverous figures climbing out of the earth. And their eyes. The artists always emphasized the eyes. Empty, yet still looking. Dead, yet still seeing. As if something still inhabited that decomposing body. A modern observer looks at these paintings and thinks, what a strange representation of death. An informed observer thinks, that is a prototype of a vampire. Because the vampire is not a 19th century invention. It is an evolution of centuries of anxiety about death that does not release, about the corpse that does not rest, about the illness that sucks life drop by drop. Every dance of death is a vampiric narrative. Every transy tomb is a portrait of the living dead. Every plague fresco is a scene of mass life draining. The vampires were there. You just didn't know how to identify them. Yet, now we enter the most dangerous territory of Renaissance art. The realm where theology and terror meet, where the sacred is confused with the profane, where angels and demons share the same physical characteristics. Renaissance cosmology was complex and terrifying. The universe did not have only heaven and hell. It had layers, intermediate dimensions, liminal spaces where ambiguous creatures dwelled. And at the center of this gray zone were the demons, but not the red-horned demons of modern cartoons. Sophisticated demons. Seductive. Dangerous precisely because they were beautiful. Enter the world of incubi and succubi. Sexual demons that visited humans during the night. And here is the detail that connects directly to vampirism. They drained vital energy through intimate contact. The church meticulously documented these cases. Women who woke up exhausted, pale, weak. Men who wasted away for no apparent reason. All reported the same thing: nocturnal visitations by seductive figures. Artists depicted these creatures with specific characteristics. Extremely pale skin, almost luminous. Piercing eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. Bodies that were simultaneously attractive and unsettling. Observe The Nightmare by Henry Fuseli. Although it belongs to the Romantic period, it encodes a Renaissance visual tradition. A demonic figure crouched on top of a sleeping woman. It does not touch her directly, but its presence oppresses her. This is the visual language of psychic draining. The demon does not need to bite. It does not need to inflict physical wounds. Its mere presence sucks the victim's vitality. Now go back to Renaissance frescoes of Last Judgment scenes. Examine the demons dragging sinners into hell. But look at their faces, at their expressions. They do not show hatred or anger. They show hunger, an existential and terrifying hunger, as if they were not dragging souls simply to punish them, but to feed on them. In many depictions, the demons are shown smelling or licking their victims, a disturbing gesture that suggests not only cruelty, but consumption. Appropriation of vital essence. The iconography of wings deserves special attention. Angels had bird wings, white and orderly feathers. Demons had bat wings, dark, veined membranes. Does that sound familiar? It should. That is exactly how the modern vampire is represented when it takes on a bestial form. The connection is not accidental. It is direct and documented. Renaissance demonological treatises meticulously described the anatomy of these creatures, and they used revealing terminology, spiritual leeches, beings that drained not physical blood, but vital essence. There is a specific case documented by Heinrich Kramer in the Malleus Maleficarum, a woman who wasted away to death after reporting nocturnal visitations. Witnesses swore they saw her each day more pale, more weak. The physicians found no illness. The priests found no complete possession. It was something in between, something that drained her from the inside out. And when she died, her body was completely exsanguinated, without blood, even though no wound was visible. How is that different from vampirism? Now, examine the representations of Lilith in Renaissance art, the first wife of Adam, according to Kabbalistic traditions, always depicted as a seductive female figure with serpentine or demonic characteristics. But observe what she does in the paintings. She does not attack directly. She approaches during sleep. She whispers. She touches softly, and the men she visits waste away. Lilith's iconography is particularly revealing. Long dark hair, alabaster skin, intense eyes. Compare her to any portrayal of a female vampire from the 19th and 20th centuries. It is the same figure. Renaissance artists were creating the visual vocabulary of the vampire centuries before the term existed. Every brushstroke defined features that would later become canonical. Now let us consider the representation of heresy. Heretics were depicted with specific characteristics: pale skin, sunken eyes, expressions of eternal torment. Why? Because heresy was seen as spiritual death. The heretic was not physically dead, but his soul was dead. He existed in the impossible state, alive without true life. And here is the most disturbing aspect. Many heretics were accused of practices that included drinking blood in rituals, profaning consecrated hosts that represented the blood of Christ. The church created a narrative in which certain people literally fed on sacred blood. It is not hard to see how this narrative would evolve into the myth of the religious vampire. The Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch. In the Hell panel, there are dozens of figures that seem to feed on others, not with obvious violence, but with disturbing intimacy. Figures embracing victims, while something invisible passes from one to the other. Hybrid creatures that seem to suck the souls of the damned through direct contact. Bosch is not just depicting torment. He is documenting draining, transfer of essence, spiritual vampirism in its purest form. And when you understand that these paintings were not seen as fantasy, but as literal representations of spiritual realities, the impact changes completely. For the Renaissance viewer, these were not metaphors. They were instruction manuals, identification guides, warnings about what could visit them during the night. The Renaissance demon was not just an abstract symbol of evil. It was a specific creature with specific characteristics that drained life in specific ways. It is a vampire. They just did not call it that yet. And the final proof? The solution against demonic attacks was exactly the same that, centuries later, would be used against vampires. Sacred symbols, holy water, specific wooden stakes, decapitation and cremation of suspicious bodies. Renaissance exorcism manuals are indistinguishable from Victorian vampire hunting guides because they are dealing with the same phenomenon under different names. When you look at a fresco of demons attacking souls, you are not just seeing religious art. You are seeing the documented birth of the vampiric archetype. And now that you know this, every suspicious-looking angel in every Renaissance church will seem different, because wings can deceive. But hungry eyes do not lie. Technique reveals more than content. This is the key to unlocking the hidden vampires of the Renaissance. It's not just what the artists painted, but how they painted it. Enter the world of chiaroscuro, the technique of dramatic contrast between light and shadow. But don't treat it as mere artistic style. Treat it as a visual philosophy of the supernatural. Chiaroscuro is not just a lighting technique. It's an ontological statement. There are things that inhabit the border between light and darkness. Things that are not entirely visible, nor completely invisible. Caravaggio mastered this technique to the level of terror. Look at Judith beheading Holofernes, a brutal decapitation emerging from absolute darkness. But look at Judith's face, perfectly lit, yet completely emotionless. She doesn't express disgust or fear. She expresses clinical focus, like a predator that knows exactly what it's doing. And the blood? Caravaggio paints it with a red so intense it seems to glow in the dark. This specific red had a name: cadmium red, mercury red, blood red. The most expensive pigments of the Renaissance were the ones that best imitated fresh blood, and the artists used them strategically. Not everywhere, only in specific spots. A drop on a pale lip, a touch on white fingers, as if they were marking the feeding points. Now, examine the white. Renaissance white pigment was made from lead, literally poisonous, and artists used it to create skin with a cadaverous appearance. There are reports of models who became ill after long sessions because the artists applied white lead powder directly onto their skin to obtain the exact shade of mortal pallor. The Renaissance obsession with pale skin was not empty aesthetics. It was loaded with meaning. Pale skin meant nobility, yes, but it also meant illness, imminent death, spectral existence. When an artist painted a figure with unnaturally white skin, they were making a statement. This person is not fully alive. Something is wrong. Something has been drained. Tenebrism takes chiaroscuro to the extreme. Light does not illuminate gradually. It explodes out of total darkness, like lightning revealing something that was there the whole time, unseen. This is the perfect technique to represent the supernatural, the creature that exists in darkness and is revealed only for brief instants. The vampire lurking in the shadows visible only when candlelight accidentally catches it. Examine the eyes in Renaissance paintings. Specifically, examine how the artists painted the shine in the eyes. A specific technique, a tiny dot of pure white on the iris. But some artists placed this dot in the wrong position, not where the light would naturally reflect, but in the center of the pupil, as if the light came from within, as if the eyes glowed with their own light. This is the technique used to paint demons and apparitions. And interestingly, it appears in many portraits of seemingly normal figures. Why? What subliminal message was being sent? Now look at the hands. Renaissance gestural language was complex and coded. Every hand position had a specific meaning. And there is one gesture that appears repeatedly in disturbing contexts. Hand extended, fingers slightly curved, as if grasping something invisible. This gesture appears in demons, in allegories of death, and occasionally in portraits of real people. What are they grasping? Air? No. They are grasping essence, soul, invisible life force. It is the gesture of spiritual draining captured in paint. Look at The Calling of St. Matthew by Caravaggio. The scene takes place in an environment contemporary to the artist, not in biblical times. And the figures around Christ look vampiric, excessively pale skin, dressed in total black, emerging from the shadows as if materializing. And their eyes follow Christ with an intensity that is not devotion. It is hunger. Caravaggio did this on purpose. He blurred the lines between sacred and profane, between human and supernatural. He forced the viewer to ask, who here is truly alive? The settings matter. Many Renaissance scenes take place in specific environments. Open tombs, churches at night, enclosed chambers with no visible windows. These are liminal spaces, places where the normal laws of nature don't fully apply, places where dead and living can meet, places of transition. And there is one architectural element that appears obsessively. Arches, not just decorative arches, but arches as portals, passages between worlds, and figures are often painted emerging from these arches, as if they come from somewhere else, as if they belong to a different reality, as if they are visitors from a realm adjacent to ours. Look at a specific painting. Saint Jerome in his Study by Antonello da Messina, a saint peacefully studying. But look at the shadows in the room. They do not match the visible light source. There are impossible shadows, darkness where there should be light, as if something unseen were blocking the illumination, as if the saint were not alone, but shared the space with something that casts no reflection, only shadow. This is the mastery of visual suggestion. The artist does not paint the supernatural directly. He paints its consequences, its side effects on the physical world. Vampiric art does not show vampires. It shows the holes they leave in reality, the inconsistencies that betray their invisible presence. And when you learn to see these inconsistencies, they are everywhere. In practically every important Renaissance painting, there is something visually wrong, something that doesn't obey the natural laws, a shadow at the wrong angle, a missing reflection, a figure with a different color temperature than the others, as if it belonged to another plane of existence. Renaissance masters did not make technical mistakes. They were obsessively precise. When something was wrong in a painting, it was intentional. It was a message. And the message was, something supernatural is present in this scene. Something that words cannot name. Something that only visual language can suggest. You were looking at vampires all along. They were encoded in the very structure of the image, in the choice of pigments, in the placement of shadows, in the direction of gazes. Now that you know how to read this language, you will never be able to unsee it. Every art gallery becomes a bestiary of hidden creatures. Every masterpiece reveals its dark secrets. Alchemy did not turn lead into gold. It turned paint into eternal terror. And now we have reached the end of our journey. But is it really the end? Or just the beginning of a new way of seeing? Trace the timeline. From Renaissance frescoes of death and decay to the romantic engravings of Goya. From the demons of Bosch to the specters of Fuseli. From Caravaggio's pale skin to the vampiresses of Edvard Munch. Every element we identified did not disappear. It evolved. It migrated. It transformed, but remained essentially the same. John Polidori's The Vampire, in 1819, describes a pale aristocrat with hypnotic magnetism who drains the life of innocent victims. But every feature of that description already existed in paintings 300 years earlier. Bram Stoker's Dracula, in 1897, presents a count who casts no reflection in mirrors, who has control over nocturnal creatures, who transforms victims into beings like himself. All of these characteristics have roots in Renaissance demonic iconography. The absence of reflection, derived from the belief that demons and specters had no reflection because they possessed no soul. A belief documented in 15th century treatises. Control over nocturnal animals? Straight from demonological manuals that listed bats, wolves, and rats as demonic familiars. The transformation of victims? The exact parallel of demonic possession, in which the possessed person became a vehicle for the demon. The literary vampire was not invented. It was distilled from centuries of visual and cultural anxiety that Renaissance artists had meticulously documented. Here are the 7 definitive elements of the modern vampiric archetype, all with proven origins in Renaissance art. 1. Cadaverous pallor. Present in every allegory of death and every depiction of a demon. 2. Supernatural seduction. Encoded in the figures of succubi and incubi. 3. The draining of vital essence. Visualized in the dances of death and in scenes of possession. 4. Nocturnal existence. Established through tenebrism and the fear of visitations during sleep. 5. Ambiguity between life and death. Literally sculpted in the transy tombs and painted in spectral figures. 6. Contagion through contact. Present in depictions of plague and demonic transmission. 7. Vulnerability to sacred symbols. Taken directly from exorcism manuals and guides to protection against evil. Every modern vampiric element is actually ancient, incredibly ancient, and now visible. Why does this matter? Because it reveals something fundamental about human fear. Renaissance anxieties were no different from ours. They just used different vocabulary. They feared mysterious illnesses that gradually drained life. We fear cancer, viruses, pandemics. They feared the dead who did not rest. We fear brain death, coma, the vegetative state. They feared predators who looked human but were monstrous. We still fear exactly that. The vampire was never really about literally drinking blood. It was always about the anxiety of being drained by forces we do not understand, of being slowly consumed by something invisible. The plague drained continents. Tuberculosis drained families. Depression drains individuals. The metaphor remains constant. Only the name of the condition changes. When you look at Vampirism, The Death of Marat by Jacques-Louis David, already beyond the Renaissance, but its descendant, you see a murdered man. But observe the composition, the pallor, the position of the body, the dramatic lighting. It is Christ taken down from the cross. It is an allegory of a martyr, and it is, visually, a vampiric scene. Someone has been drained, not only of blood, but of meaning, of life, of future. Your responsibility now, as an informed viewer, is to do the visual archaeology, to unearth the meanings that curators do not mention, to see the vampires that scholars ignore, not because they are literally vampires, but because they represent the same complex of fears, longings, and fascinations that we have crystallized under that name. The next time you walk into a museum and see a pale Madonna holding an equally pale Christ, ask yourself, what am I really seeing here? A sacred scene of maternal love? Yes, but also a meditation on premature death, on bodies that should be alive but are not, on the impossible intermediate state. The next time you look at a portrait of a Renaissance noble with marble skin and piercing eyes, ask yourself, why did he want to be portrayed looking half dead? Social status? Partially, but also a statement about transcending common mortality, about existing in an elevated, or would it be degraded, state between human and spectral. The vampires of the Renaissance didn't wear capes or have fangs. They didn't sleep in coffins or fear garlic, but they drained life. They inhabited shadows. They blurred the boundaries between death and life. And that made them far more terrifying than any cinematic version could ever be. Because they were indistinguishable from reality. Because they were reality. Let's return to the initial question. What if the most beautiful art secretly hid the monstrous? Now you have the answer. It's not what if. It always did. Renaissance beauty does not deny horror. It encodes it. It preserves it. It transmits it across the centuries disguised as high culture. You went to the art gallery to elevate yourself, to appreciate the triumph of the human spirit. And, without knowing it, you were looking at a bestiary of the undead, meticulously documented. The artists knew. They always knew. Every brushstroke was intentional. Every shadow strategic. Every drop of red deliberate. They were not creating vampires. They were creating the visual language that centuries later we would use to finally name what had always been there. And now that language is yours. You have learned the grammar of visual terror. You can read between the lines of every masterpiece. The testament is complete. The vampires of the Renaissance revealed, not as fantasy, but as cultural history, as collective anxiety transformed into immortal art. Immortal, the right word to describe both vampires and works of art. Both transcend death through cultural replication. Both feed on human attention in order to continue existing. Every time you look at these paintings, you reanimate them. You feed them with your attention, and they, in return, transform your perception of reality. You entered this journey as a casual viewer. You leave as an initiate, as someone who sees what has always been hidden in plain sight. And maybe, just maybe, that is what vampires have always been. Not literal monsters, but living metaphors for what it means to drain and be drained. To consume and be consumed. The Renaissance understood this better than any later age, because it lived it more intensely, and it left the most complete record. A record that is not in history books or medical treatises. It's on church walls, in museum galleries, on the ceilings of abandoned palaces, waiting patiently for 5 centuries for someone to finally learn how to read it correctly. Now you have learned, now you see, and you will never stop seeing. The next question is not, where are the vampires of the Renaissance? The next question is, what else is hidden in plain sight, waiting to be revealed? But that is a journey for another day. For now, you have work to do. Museums to revisit, paintings to re-examine, truths to unearth. The vampires of the Renaissance have been revealed, but there are entire libraries of secrets still encoded in Western art, in every period, in every movement, in every brushstroke. And if you have come this far, if you followed this journey to its end, you have the right mind to keep unearthing, to keep revealing, to keep seeing. Because in the end, it's not about vampires. It's about learning to see beyond the surface, to question official narratives, to trust your own eyes more than the museum labels. Curators tell you what to see. Historians tell you how to interpret. But your eyes tell you the truth. And the truth is that Renaissance art is alive with hidden terror, with coded anxiety, with vampires waiting patiently in painted shadows. You awakened them by seeing them. You brought them back into cultural consciousness. You completed the cycle the artists began 500 years ago. They painted the vampires. You recognized them. And thus, the cultural transmission is complete. The immortal testament has been read. The undead have been named. The journey through Renaissance shadows has come to an end. But remember, the end of one journey is always the beginning of another. And now you have the map. You have the eyes. You have the courage. What you do with this knowledge is up to you. But one thing is certain. You will never walk into an art gallery the same way again. You will never look at a Renaissance masterpiece with innocence again. You will never accept the superficial narrative again, because now you know. The vampires are there. They always were. They always will be, waiting in painted shadows, lurking in the eyes of holy figures, draining life through paint and time. And you, now initiated into the mysteries, are one of the few who can see them. Use this power wisely. Share this knowledge carefully. And never, ever forget. Art is not just beautiful. It is dangerous. It is alive. It is vampiric. And now it has seen you seeing it. And that changes everything. Welcome to the other side of the mirror. Welcome to the true history of art. Welcome to the world where vampires have always been real, just waiting for someone brave enough to name them. You were that someone, and now you will never be the same.